Welcome to episode 7 of the ARME Radio podcast, the show where we aim to offer accessible education to healthcare and fitness professionals alike and to bridge academic research to the clinical setting. In today's episode, Alan Aragon joins us from sunny California. Alan is a nutrition researcher and educator with over 20 years of experience. He writes a monthly research review known as the Alan Aragon Research Review, or AARR, and has been published in peer-reviewed scientific literature, most notably as the lead author of the ISSN Position Stand on Diets and Body Composition, and is co-author for Nutrient Timing Revisited, the most viewed article in the history of the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. Alan also continues to work in private practice, designing programs for recreational, Olympic, and professional athletes, and anyone looking to achieve their health goals. In today's episode, we discuss a variety of nutrition topics, including diet and inflammation, protein intake, nutrition myths, and supplementation, among many other things. Be sure to visit us at www.thearmy.ca for more resources and information, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode.
What can I do, man? It's just been blessed in that. Yeah, 100%. I'm privileged.
For sure. So Alan, I just want to know, like, what kind of got you interested in doing this, and right now, like, what's your big interests?
Well, I have to dig back into the dark ages. Almost 30 years ago, I started in the industry, and I started in personal training, and that's literally in-person personal training when online training didn't exist. And so I did that for about a decade, and then the subsequent decade was spent in nutritional counseling, and that's where I got my formal degrees in nutrition. And I still maintained an interest in exercise and fitness, and then the past 8 years have been almost full-time with nutrition research. So sports nutrition for altering body composition, just collaborating on various research projects in the direction of improving performance, body composition, a little bit of health sprinkled in there. And so right now my main role is an educator and a researcher. And having been in the field for such a long time, I get a lot of gratitude out of educating the professionals in the field, as well as the patrons and the clients in this whole realm. So that is where I'm at in a nutshell.
Yeah. So I think for all of us, one of the biggest things that we see is just the amount of information and misinformation that we see online so readily nowadays, right?
Yes.
One of the big things that we see in our world of musculoskeletal health is the concept of inflammatory foods. So foods that you should be eating to avoid inflammation, and foods that you're going to be eating that are pro-inflammation, and why that matters or why that doesn't is really my big question for you.
Yeah. The concept of inflammation is widely misunderstood, and it does have a relationship with diet, but it doesn't have this relationship with specific foods in isolation, and doesn't even necessarily have a relationship with diet in isolation from other variables like the type of lifestyle that's maintained, the type of body composition that's maintained, and other non-diet lifestyle factors as well. So inflammation as a general concept, you can look at it in the acute sense, where it can be either good or bad depending on the stimulus. You know, anytime you do any kind of exercise, you're going to get an inflammatory response. Actively trying to suppress that is not necessarily a good thing from an adaptation to training standpoint. The idea of chronic subclinical type inflammation of the tissues throughout the body, especially the endothelial tissues throughout the body, can be a precursor to heart disease, atherogenesis, and that's when inflammation can potentially be a bad thing. And there's other avenues that inflammation can rear its ugly side, like what you might be dealing with in the Department of Joint Health musculoskeletal type pathologies and scenarios where inflammation can impede training progress, can be progressive to the point that it really hinders people's goals. So inflammation is sort of this multifaceted, multi-tentacled thing. And so when it's talked about, it's often talked about as this sort of single homogeneous, like singular unit that you can manage easily with just these 5 special foods or whatnot. As inflammation relates to diet, I can't give you a list of foods that everybody needs to avoid in order to get rid of the evil inflammation. Generally speaking, foods that are highly refined and ultra processed can contribute to the adverse or unfavorable aspects of inflammation. And I'm talking about this sort of chronic low-grade inflammation that can lead to various pathological issues of health. The foods that are whole for the most part, or minimally refined, minimally engineered and processed and transformed from their natural states, if your diet is predominated with those types of foods, you generally can avoid courting that kind of danger related to inflammation. There's a lot of mythical things that circulate the cyberscape in terms of inflammation from X, Y, or Z foods, and I hear a lot of stuff about dairy being inflammatory. But if you were to do a search on dairy and inflammation of the peer-reviewed literature, you would find neutral to favorable effects of dairy on inflammation. So if I were to kind of boil this answer down to something usable, people tend to miss the forest for the trees when they think of inflammation, and they should mainly focus on just improving the quality of the diet in terms of predominating the diet with minimally refined, mostly whole foods, stuff that's not ultra processed. And if you can do that while maintaining a favorable body composition and physical activity level, and other non-diet lifestyle factors as well, like stress, like interpersonal relationships, keep that kind of stuff in check, then inflammation itself isn't necessarily something that you really need to worry about. And if I can go a little bit more into the weeds here, there may be one aspect of diet and inflammation that's potentially worth considering, and that is a lack of consumption of omega-3 fatty acids. And this is common in the Western world, and it's common amongst Westernized societies and populations that live far from marine life, basically. And so they just simply don't get enough omega-3 fatty acids. And what they end up doing is they end up eating a lot of other types of fatty acids, like omega-6 fatty acids, saturated fats. And when kind of at the annoying biochemical level, when you have an overabundance of other types of fatty acids, specifically omega-6, at the expense of omega-3 fatty acid intake, then you kind of bias physiology towards inflammation. And so if somebody thinks that they've got an issue with inflammation at that level, then they may want to look into ramping up their omega-3 fatty acid intake and take a look at the types of fats in their diet, and perhaps trimming back on the other types of fats just to be able to fit in more omega-3. So
yeah, no, that was great. You touched on like a lot of great things there. And I think the one thing I want to just take from that immediately there, talking between the omega-3 and the omega-6 difference, is if you could give like the easiest switch that you could suggest. So if someone wants to reduce their omega-6s and they don't have many omega-3s, what's the one thing that you would suggest adding into their diet to kind of boost that omega-3 count? Or if it's even just like supplementing with omega-3 capsules as well. Like what would
you... Sure. The bad, in quotes, the bad kind of omega-6 that the general population tends to get too much of typically comes from fried foods, packaged snack type foods, and any kind of usually any fatty desserts would tend to carry some of that stuff, especially if it's the commercially available type that you can just grab off the shelf. Sometimes people overuse vegetable oils in salad dressings, and it's fine if it's something like extra virgin olive oil, but there are some establishments, like if somebody eats out a lot, you really don't have much control over the type of oils that the foods are cooked in or fried in or dressed with. And so you're kind of at the mercy of the establishment in that sense. But I would just, as a practical matter, I would increase the amount of fatty fish that you consume through the course of the week. Like if you can attempt to commit to 2 days a week eating fatty fish, then you're coming pretty close to what we know is in line with the general public health guidelines for hitting your omega-3 needs. If you're somebody who doesn't like fish at all, let alone fatty fish, then you can supplement with fish oil. There are certain, there's a spectrum of different types of fish oil that you can take in. If you can find a brand that is the triglyceride form of fish oil, rather than the esterified form, and it'll say on the label. I personally use the Costco brand, and that's the Kirkland brand of fish oil. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the quality control is good. And number two, it's USP verified, I think. A handful of the Costco brand supplements are USP verified, and that's a trustworthy third-party source. That's just what I personally use. I'm sure there's other products out there that are good products as well. And as far as dosage goes, in the literature, somewhere between 3 to 6 grams a day of fish oil is going to cover most people's needs for whether they're going for either a preventive type of effect or a therapeutic type of effect. And honestly, like if if you never did that, if you never strived for getting this omega-3 action in your diet through supplements or through fatty fish intake, if you never did it your whole life, you'd probably still be fine if you had the other boxes checked off in terms of lifestyle, physical activity, and just diet quality and favorable body composition ongoing. It is kind of a nitpick. So when things like, when you bring up the omega-3 versus omega-6 ratio topic, I would say that if you were to like list a hierarchy of important things in your life that are going to enable you to lead or live a long and healthy life, omega-3 and omega-6 ratio is kind of down at sort of the bottom-ish.
If we're looking at someone who is already a healthy weight, already physically active, already sleeping well, and has the rest of their lifestyle factors under control, this is a good next step for them. But if someone is not exercising and not at a healthy weight, or they're better off checking off those big boxes first, eh?
Well, yeah. And there are some therapeutic targets that are worth considering with respect to excessive omega-6 and not enough omega-3, because the whole inflammation thing, it is related to pain as well. And so people who get headaches chronically, they may want to look at increasing their omega-3 intake and decreasing their omega-6 intake. But even in that case, there are foods that are rich in omega-6, but still cardiovascularly healthy. Like the first thing that comes to mind is nuts. And so you're going to get a mix of different fatty acids, but you're still going to be getting a lot of omega-6 with that. So I tend to default to just eat more omega-3 and not necessarily worry about the omega-6 aspects of your diet, as long as most of your diet is not this ultra processed refined type of junk.
Alan, you touched on, or you mentioned the use of the word processed, ultra processed, or even engineered foods. I think sometimes a lot of us can fall prey to the appeal to nature fallacy, and perhaps get a little bit too much fear in regards to some of these words. And obviously, like GMOs and stuff like that, there is certainly some benefits for that, correct? Could you maybe touch on that topic of maybe some of the common terms that are maybe seen as evil in the field of nutrition that might not be so, just to put some people's minds at ease?
Yeah, words definitely matter. I use the word processed very carefully because I really try to attach it with the other word, ultra processed, whenever I remember to. And ultra processed and refined is another word that is kind of a bit of a powder keg there. I try to attach highly to the word refined. So ultra processed, highly refined. And that's because processing of foods is often necessary to make them edible in the first place. It often can increase the nutrient bioavailability of foods when, for example, even just cooking can increase the bioavailability of certain nutrients within foods. And an interesting concept is just looking at the body, the human body, as a food processor. So, we're going to be processing the food one way or another. So just because a food may be processed doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. One of the classic examples of a highly engineered, highly processed food that's far removed from its original state in nature would be protein powders. And we can use whey protein as sort of the cardinal example of a wonder of food engineering. So, not only do you have the lactose and the fat engineered out of this stuff, but you've preserved all of the stuff that's least offending and highly nutrient dense. And using something like whey as an example of the exception of processed foods is pretty effective. And whey isn't on an island by itself in terms of processing and refinement, where you end up with a food that is conducive to health, conducive to improving body composition. And also protein powders in general have kind of been a godsend in terms of economic benefit and convenience, while preserving the quality of the proteins in the food. And of course, if you're a bro, you're going to be drinking protein shakes. I know all four of you guys are bros. I don't think you can hide that. You don't think you can hide the guns and the muscles and all that. And so yeah, you mentioned GMO. I recently came across some literature showing that genetically modified corn is not only more nutritious than the untreated stuff, but it has less mycotoxin or less mold, and it's actually safer. And so that the whole controversy behind genetic modification of foods and stuff, it's one big mess. You have strong opinions on both sides, but at least in the case of corn, you can build a case for genetic modification actually improving the quality of the stuff and safety.
Okay, so corn and whey protein, we got our good go-tos.
Right? You got your post-workout meal right there.
It's kind of chunky. It's like a bubble tea at that point, right?
You got your corn, you got your whey protein, and your omega-3s. There's your carbs, your fats, your protein. That's all you need.
Yep. Bottle it and sell it, man.
So I just wanted to kind of recap a couple of things. There's a lot of talk about, again, like eating your whole foods. You get a lot of gurus saying you have to eat natural, you have to eat whole foods, but then pushing their supplement line. and just the kind of the false dichotomy there of, well, if you're pushing your supplements, but that's extremely processed, right? So I kind of wanted to know your opinion on, and we might know some of these answers, but if you had to kind of give the budget rundown of what supplements you may want to take as a bro, that might actually have an effect on performance or muscle building, what would be kind of your staples?
Well, if we were to look at the different goals, like performance wise, we've got muscle size and strength, power on one end of the spectrum, and then we've got endurance capacity on the other end. And for the strength and power side, creatine is kind of it's the end all basically of legal supplementation for building strength, size, and power. Every other supplement next to creatine either has such a sparse evidence base that you're kind of just waiting for like the third or fourth study to come out and crush your dreams because it didn't have a positive effect. Whereas with creatine, we're talking hundreds of studies, probably approaching the high hundreds. I wouldn't be surprised if it crossed over into the 4 digits, where it's just looking at various aspects of creatine's effectiveness on performance. And there's also some clinical benefits as well, like on joint health and even on some neurogenerative type of applications as well. So creatine in the monohydrate form is pretty much it for size, strength, power. There are other supplements that sort of have an upstart status that might potentially either augment or be able to complement creatine's effects. One of them is beta-alanine. So with creatine being on the effective on the further end towards the strength and power end, beta-alanine lands a little bit more towards the middle of the strength endurance continuum, where it could potentially help with high intensity aerobic type work. So it would kind of pick up where creatine leaves off with the lower rep stuff, and beta-alanine could potentially help you along with volume and higher repetition, higher endurance type of work. So we've got creatine as the king. We got beta-alanine with a couple dozen studies under its belt, a couple meta-analyses showing effectiveness. There are other supplements that are potentially worth looking into. There's nitrates, beetroot juice, which would provide the nitrates, and that's more of an endurance type of athletic performance supplement. There's always going to be some weird caveats and things with these supplements, like with beta-alanine, for example. Not everybody agrees with it. Not everybody likes the paresthesia effect, or that tingling, kind of like prickly tingling effect. Bothers some folks a lot. You would have to find a slow release beta-alanine, or split up the dose like to significantly under a gram each point in the day. And with even with stuff like nitrates, like with beetroot juice, there's some slightly concerning research showing that it lowers resting metabolic rate. That's not necessarily a horrible thing with resting metabolic rate slowing down. I mean, the only thing that could potentially adversely impact is somebody who's really trying to lose body weight and trying to bias their energy balance in the energy outside of things. There's another supplement potentially worth looking into as far as the higher intensity aerobic type work goes, and that's sodium bicarbonate, or good old-fashioned baking soda. The caveat with that, of course, which a lot of people complain about, is they get these urgent needs to projectile poop. So that's not necessarily the best thing for endurance performance. But that kind of rounds it out with supplements that you can point to as, okay, these guys are the big three that have the most, that have the broadest and deepest evidence base. Creatine kind of just just leads the pack by a very large margin. And then you've got beta alanine, you've got nitrate, and then you've got sodium bicarbonate with the asterisk being you might poop your pants. And then there's other things worth looking into as well. Betaine has a consistent body of literature where it shows ergogenic benefit for lifting performance. Citrulline malate is a maybe. It had a good start in the literature, and then the studies, the most recent studies, just kind of fell flat. So you kind of have half a chance at that kind of working for lifting capacity. Another supplement that's worth mentioning that's not necessarily a supplement but a drug is caffeine. And caffeine works through a large range of the strength endurance continuum. It works for strength, it works for endurance, it works for everything in between. So it's almost like legal meth. So of course it's going to work, right? But yeah, those are the biggies in terms of performance supplementation.
So Alan, I'm just going to cut you off for a second there,
Sure.
Before I forget. But you mentioned caffeine as a drug, and I got to ask the question now: supplements versus drugs. Where are we making the cutoff? What definition are you using for that?
Oh boy.
And you can keep it short, and if it's too long and winded, don't feel we can add
Yeah,
it to it.
drove more time next week.
Yeah.
Basically anything legal. I'm mainly looking at legal, not necessarily physiological. So yeah, that's how I would classify that. Caffeine is an interesting compound because when you take the anhydrous form, you can get into serious trouble if you overdose it. A lot of people don't realize that the lethal dose of caffeine is pretty small. I mean, most people can get into serious medical situations with like a teaspoon of caffeine anhydrous. And so usually most people can just, the upper end of what people can tolerate in terms of caffeine abuse would be like a gram in a day. And so a teaspoon of caffeine anhydrous, you get 5 grams of caffeine in a day. You could land up in the hospital or in the grave pretty much. So caffeine is not something to be taken lightly at all. And in fact, this is on a bit of a tangent, but energy drinks, their consumption amongst young folks who are either toughing it out through college or toughing it out through college and the partying life, they tend to abuse energy drinks. They tend to abuse caffeine. And so a lot of experts, public health experts, consider energy drinks to be somewhat of a problem at the public health level, because you can take down like a half a dozen caffeinated energy drinks in a day and easily exceed 1 gram and a half caffeine, 2 grams of caffeine in a day, when the average upper safe limit for adults is 400 milligrams a day of caffeine. And that's the equivalent of roughly 4 or 5 cups of coffee a day.
So I usually start the day with about a liter and a half of coffee.
That's perfect.
Should I be cutting back, or?
That's how you start the day.
Not
so
joking.
You're dead serious. Well, generally speaking, that liter that you're taking down would be the average upper limit of what non-pregnant adults should be taking in the general population.
We should probably be worried about him then.
Yeah, that's so going like a liter and a half, I can see the human organism being perfectly fine with adapting to that level of caffeine, especially if you've been at it for a while and you've habituated. But it's always good to know, just sort of statistically at the general population level, that all of the the geniuses of the research world got together and kind of converged on this 400 milligram limit on average. So your 400 milligram limit on average is done by the time you're done with that first liter.
So I might be an outlier, but if we're going to follow statistics, maybe I should cut back a little bit.
Maybe you're getting 600 milligrams in. And honestly, I know a lot of people, bro, who a lot of people who drink that much. Like that's the equivalent of 6 cups of coffee in a day. They're fine, honestly. I mean, if it doesn't impact your sleep adversely, then you don't necessarily have a whole lot of concrete reasons to cut back if you're doing fine health-wise and lifestyle-wise.
Yeah, caffeine's one of those interesting ones too, right? Because that upper limit gets you popped in international competition for a bunch of sports, right? Like that WADA limit of caffeine is attainable, right? It's legal in competition to a certain dose, but then once you hit that threshold, so now that performance versus legality threshold creeps in terms of sports standard, right?
Yes. If my memory is serving me correctly, could be like 9 milligrams per kilogram that gets people popped. 9 to 10 milligrams per kilo could get you popped.
Yeah, that's the big deal, is because you'll see I'm a big fan of Olympic weightlifting, and so you'll see people just drinking Pepsi. Like that's the equivalent of their caffeine intake, because they're, if you're a 60 kilo woman, right? Like a full liter of Pepsi is, still enough it's still 50 milligrams of caffeine, right?
Right.
All right, I'm going to take it a completely different way now here and ask something, get back to the protein conversation we were having a little bit earlier. So I know both myself and Mike are really interested in the process of healthy aging and how important protein and muscle mass is for healthy aging. With a lot of the literature showing that people, especially as they get older, stop consuming protein to the point that they're getting 0.2, 0.3 grams per kilogram a day, which is, as we know, is not enough.
Yeah.
So we talked a little about supplementation for protein, but if you could say what is the best way that we could probably try to encourage people as they age to consume adequate protein, what advice can you give to people if they're, let's say, they're clinicians or just people who are talking to their grandparents? What is the best way that we can keep adequate protein intake as we age?
That is a great question, dude. Yes, there is an issue with widespread sarcopenia among the elderly population. And typically you can look at modifying the eating pattern, the protein intake through the day. And one of the best ways to do that with the elderly population is to significantly increase protein intake at breakfast. So what happens with the older and the elderly population is they have at least 50% of their protein intake at the dinner meal. And then it's just really sparse at breakfast, and then it begins to pick up at lunch. So if you can just have a solid ass whack of protein at the breakfast meal, even if it takes just choking down 1 or 2 scoops of protein, of a protein shake, protein powder in a protein shake, then that would do a whole lot for making sure that this population is getting enough protein. And there's nothing wrong with drinking down protein. There's nothing wrong with supplementing the diet with a couple of protein shakes at any random point in the day. And that's another thing about the beauty of protein powder is the sort of the quickness, the convenience, and the ease of application there. And of course, the high quality proteins that are used for that. So yeah, that's what I would do. It's just kind of like the danger zones are meal number 1. It's probably going to have maybe 10 grams of protein. You really want to boost that up by 20 to 40 grams or so per meal.
Yeah, that's it's a pretty simple solution, right? And you've mentioned a bunch, protein is cost efficient, protein supplementation is cost efficient. It's not overly expensive, and the quality is pretty good, right? You can obviously get into better and worse depending on how you look at things, but the base level whey protein, pretty simple and effective for people across the lifespan, right?
Yes.
That was great.
For sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's fantastic.
And some people mistakenly think that they won't be able to tolerate whey protein because they're lactose intolerant. Well, whey protein powder has like nearly zip for carbs, let alone a lactose dose that's going to send somebody into a gastrointestinal issue. So I thought you were going to ask whether we need to cut back on protein in order to increase longevity or something like that, because there's a silly concept that circulates the fitness circles, which is protein restriction for longevity and stuff. And that's one of the more frustrating and dumber kinds of myths that has been put out there. I'm not a proponent of eating enough protein to like kill King Kong or something like that, but I am not a proponent of restricting protein for longevity, because that's based on a bunch of animal research and really low level organism research. And it's more hypothetical than it is proven or demonstrated for humans.
Alan, isn't that the same argument a lot of the intermittent fasters will use for longevity purposes? We're fasting for prolonged periods of time in order to increase longevity. Do you have any personal opinions or what you would say in regards to the validity of that?
It's a hypothesis, and
yeah,
there's no definitive or consistent or compelling evidence in support of that claim. Intermittent fasting is a wonderful way to control your energy intake, and the foundation for a lot of chronic disease is just eating too much. And so intermittent fasting kind of puts a very practical and hard line on that sort of path to disease. And so it's good in that sense, but for those who want to adopt a more linear pattern of intake and can still control the intake overall, they're not going to be at any sort of disadvantage longevity-wise compared to folks who are intermittent fasting.
On the topic of potentially too much protein intake, which I think we all agree that a lot is good at a certain point, but in terms of the potential side effects in kidney function, at what point should athletes or lifters or anyone in general start to be concerned with their intake?
That's a good question, and it's kind of hard to study that it's kind of hard to investigate that question to the degree that would satisfy every skeptic about high protein and kidney stuff. However, in subjects who are healthy, they don't have any, at least no known pre-existing kidney disease. They've ran studies, and this is specifically out of Jose Antonio's lab, where they've looked at time periods as long as 1 to 2 years, where they're feeding the subjects 3 grams per kilogram and beyond, and not seeing any ill effects on the full range of parameters for liver function, kidney function, full metabolic panels, just riding that 3 grams per kilo just for months and months and months and months. So, and even with bone health too, that's one of the other concerns of high protein, leaching calcium from the bones and all that stuff. Still didn't happen with as high as over 3 grams per kilogram of body weight. So for anybody who has enough nerve to just want to consume 4 grams per kilo of body weight and carry that out for years and years, more power to you. But as far as the evidence stands, right around like the 3-ish grams per kilo, which is pretty dang high. And it's hard to consume that amount of protein unless you're just fully dedicated to a sport like bodybuilding. You'll see a lot of the higher level bodybuilders doing like 3 grams per kilo up to 4 grams per kilo, just because of the nature of their sport, and it does seem to help some of those guys with their goals. But aside from that population, it's actually kind of a challenge to consume 3 grams per kilo. It's a challenge to consume 2 grams per kilo in terms of protein per day, if you're not, taking down protein powder and stuff at various points in the day. So unless you have a clinically objectively diagnosed kidney issue, kidney disease, then taking down high protein amounts is just as little of a concern as taking down high fat amounts or high carbohydrate amounts. The body is perfectly equipped to metabolize protein in high amounts, as long as we're looking at kind of like the bigger picture of are you eating enough calories, total calories, but not too much. And yeah, so the protein scare for kidneys and bone, it just doesn't hold up to the evidence.
Alan, as you mentioned when you were talking about intermittent fasting, just taking a step back here, you piqued my interest about this. You said it was great for controlling energy balance, that it's a means by which people can limit the amount of caloric intake. So we know that increased adiposity does play a role in overall general health. What is your view on the idea of healthy obesity, or you can be healthy at any size, or is this really possible, or does this increased adiposity always carry inherent health risks?
Yeah, that's a good question, dude. Okay, there's pros and cons to the health at every size philosophy. So the pros would be a focus on lifting the focus off of restriction and putting the focus on positive or things that you can add to the program. So they put the focus on physical activity. And what I like about that is they encourage people to do the type of physical activity that they enjoy. So when you encourage that, then that's a good setup for adherence and sustainability. It's not everybody's gonna, like, if you were to just imagine, like, we told everybody they had to do CrossFit WODs. That's your freaking workout. You have to do, you have to go individually with what the person enjoys and have them do that. So that's good with the health at every size. They encourage movement. The other thing is they take the focus off of obsessing over the scale every day. They just basically want people to chuck their scales and focusing on the quantifiable aspects of progress or getting out of a state of obesity or overweight. They take the focus off that, which for a lot of people can be quite helpful. But and they also put a certain emphasis on there's no such thing as good and bad foods. You don't want to attach moral implications to any type of food choices or any type of diet. Just kind of keep your eyes on your own plate type of thing. I'm all for that. That's great. The aspects that I think that health at every size neglects is the extremes of obesity, like stage 2 and or class 2 and class 3 obesity, which almost invariably are associated with several comorbidities. And there's really no denying that. And there's really no getting around that. So technically, yeah, health at every size, as long as you can stay away from class 2 and class 3 obesity. I think that we can be as honest with the situation as that without kind of alienating anybody. And I'm all for programs that operate on principles that don't focus on just weight loss. There's a study done by, his last name is Clark. And it was, I believe it was a year long. No, it was 6 months. It was either 6 months or a year. Could have been 6 months, where the focus was on improving training performance. So improving strength with the lifts, improving endurance with the cardio stuff. And the focus was off of weight completely. The only quantifiable aspect of the program was limiting carbohydrate to 100 grams a day, and protein was set pretty high. I believe it was like 1.5-ish grams per kilo. It was adequate, but the focus, the subjects were specifically instructed to not care about weight. Don't weigh yourself. Don't worry about the weight. Don't worry about weight loss. Let's focus on improving strength and endurance. And by the end of the 6 months, there was just massive weight loss that occurred in this particular sample of subjects. And it's one of the most successful weight loss programs ever published. And it was done semi-recently too, within the last few years. And it really serves as a testament to the idea that we don't necessarily have to focus on or even necessarily keep track of body weight and obsess over that. So health at every size would kind of give the nod to something like that. But I don't necessarily agree with the denial of the health risks associated with higher levels of obesity.
That was amazing. Honestly, I think you kind of eloquently put that. You're not putting values on the person. You're just more so saying these are the issues associated with the actual physiology of it, right?
Right.
So I'm going to kind of go back a step, and I want to talk about Costco, because you mentioned you take a lot of Costco supplements in Kirkland, right?
Yeah.
I know, at least with our profession, there's a lot of individuals that are really into fitness. It's just, I mean, you kind of go into it because of that. It kind of filters a lot of people. But there's a idea that Costco supplements are bad, and it's a blanket statement. Do you know maybe why this would be, or why people seem to think these like big commercial conglomerates that make supplements are bad? Or what you could say in a simple, eloquent way, what you would tell them, like, no, that's BS kind of thing?
I think there was an incident that happened with Consumer Labs testing one of the supplements. I'm not remembering exactly which one. And I think that there was the potential for it to not stand up to the scrutiny of Consumer Labs. So I think that could have been the root of that whole Costco thing. However, the Costco supplements that I used are USP verified, and that's the United States Pharmacopoeia. And the USP has been the government's regulation arm of the drug industry for over 100 years. So they're like a long-standing, very expensive type of verification to run, which Costco can obviously afford for some of their supplements. So generally speaking, I wouldn't worry about it, Mike. Oh, and by the way, I was able to find that study that he talked about by Clark, and it was done in 2018, and it's called Periodization of Exercise Induces Long-Term Weight Loss While Focusing Strictly on Improvements in Cardiovascular and Musculoskeletal Fitness for Individuals Who Are Overfat.
Overfat, I like that.
Yeah, that might be one of the longest study titles ever. But yeah, that's by Clark, and it's a fascinating study. I was trying to remember whether it was a 6-monther or a year. I'm scanning the abstract here.
You are like an older version of Ben. Just a heads up. Ben does all this with chronic pain and chiropractic research, and it is uncanny how similar you are.
He is our encyclopedia, and it seems like that's you as well in the realm of nutrition.
Yeah.
It's like the nicest thing you've ever said to me, Mike.
It's called obsessive compulsion.
It's funny because that's what they've also told me. They've been telling me it's unhealthy to stay up at 4 a.m. reading stuff like this. So can you confirm that, or are they making stuff up? Or
Well, Ben, do you want to tell them what you have with all your research, where you save it all, and what's it called?
Yeah, so I started a thing like half a year ago, and I'm not sure how other people compile the things that they find interesting that they've read.
Mm-hmm.
But I just got tired of being like, oh yeah, I read something on this, and then you know how things like, oh, you lose it, you don't save it, and then you realize the title's 400 words, like that Clark said, and you can never find it again. Mm-hmm. So I just started compiling this super document that's now hit over just like 1,000 studies. But I decided to put it into alphabetical order because I have a problem with myself.
Okay.
So I guess the question here is, at what point does obsession become a good thing?
When it becomes profitable.
Yeah,
Oh, the profitable part. Oh yeah, don't even ask me about. Oh, dude, yeah, I'm the worst at that. As far as maximizing time for money. Oh man, I could just work on. You can give me an assignment that should take like an hour to put together, but if I have like 3 days to do it, I'll take the whole 3 days. It's really funny. Yeah. I would. I'm gonna plead the fifth on that.
No, but it's like and again, I might be speaking for you here, but the worst thing is when you have these great peer-reviewed studies that have been like with great methods, and you go to talk on something. There's nothing worse than misremembering and misciting what you're talking about, right?
Because bothers me so much.
Right. Well, one of the worst things across like every field is when someone goes, "Well, research supports it." Well, what do you mean research supports it? Like, what is that? What is it? Whose research? Like, is it your mom's blog? Like, Or are you going to give me like something that can actually help substantiate any of the claims that are being made? All right, that's my rant for the night, guys. I'll see you later.
No, it's important. It's an important concept because we got to ask ourselves, how do we know what we know? I mean, there's the whole gamut from anecdotes of people who you think are smart and credible, all the way to whatever might have been published, and so it's just one big mix, and we have to kind of consider all lines of evidence and not necessarily just the research, but the research is just so deep and broad on some subjects that it's worth getting lost in that kind of thing. If you're in the position to educate people and you do want to convey the state of the evidence versus like your opinions and your biases. So, yeah, that's an important question.
This is a really good segue here into mentioning the AARR, the Alan Aragon Research Review. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Alan?
Yes, that was started in 2008. I got the idea to do it after spending literally like 6 to 8 hours a day on the bodybuilding.com forums, just engaging in debates and answering people's questions about nutrition. And I was just I was seeing myself spending literally all day, every day. I would see nutritional clients. I had a nutritional counseling practice, a private practice, like face-to-face. So in between clients, I would be on bodybuilding.com, either debating or answering questions. After my shift was done, I would stay on the forums and just answer questions because people just kept them coming, and then I thought to myself, God, I can either like have no life and just keep answering these freaking questions all day for free, or I can organize it a lot better and in a formal type of publication where I write about these things and I can make the answers much more accurate and much more research based. And so at the time, around 2007 or so, there was no research reviews existing in the fitness space. There was one really short-lived physical therapy oriented research review, but then it just kind of disappeared. And there were various types of things like that, but nothing like really nutrition focused, nothing nutrition and training integrated type of focus where you cover sports nutrition, nutrition for optimizing health and fitness and stuff. So I had that idea. I thought about doing it for a full year before I actually launched it in 2008. And I've just been at it ever since then. So that's 12 years. I've been doing a monthly review of the research that interests me. So the research that interests me is stuff that has to do with diet's effect on health and body composition and performance as well. And so that's just been my ongoing thing. And there have been a bunch of other offshoots of my research review, and all of them are offshot from my students and my colleagues. Let's be real, they all freaking, I'm older than all of them by like 10 years, so they're all my damn students. But they do an amazing job as well. So I feel like my research review really kind of changed the game and really kind of changed the fitness industry landscape, getting people to, you know, stay up and lose a lot of sleep over studies and shit like that.
Well, Alan, I just want to say thank you on behalf of all of us. I actually basically met you through Instagram, and you asked me to write a guest article for you, and I guess that's how this all happened. So if it wasn't for your ability to take all your knowledge and start this, I would say, community at this point, that's basically what you built, right? We wouldn't be here. And I think you've inspired a lot of people. You know, you're not that old, but I'm going to say in our generation, at least, to try to do the same thing with our professions, because it really is needed. There needs to be a lot more collaboration. There needs to be a lot more focus on taking the research, but not just understanding it, but learning how to translate it so other people can understand that. And I think you've really mastered that craft, and you've learned how to master it in a way that takes other people and allows them to communicate that also. So I just want to thank you again on that long-winded spiel. But if you do want to see Alan's content or learn more about him, he has his website, alanaragon.com. We'll include a link on it. And his Instagram is the Alan Aragon. He actually was the original character that the Lord of the Rings character was based off of, if anyone else is interested about that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So on that note, if anyone else has any final thoughts, I just want to say thank you again.
That went by fast, man. I was ready to answer like another half hour of brotology, but yeah, we can definitely do this again. Yeah. Ben, David, Elliot, Mike, thank you guys so much for the opportunity to speak to your audiences. And
yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Got it, y'all.